Lone rancher paid $2 for giant bride with sack on her head at auction. Marries her when she says her name. Years of tending cattle, fixing fences, and waking to the sun's warm glow had taught him the value of solitude. John did not need much, just enough land, a few animals, and the peaceful rhythm of rural life. People often called him a loner, but he didn't mind. He found comfort in the quiet, in the simple routine of ranch life. It was early spring, and the town was preparing for its yearly auction. The event was always lively, a place where neighbors gathered to buy and sell livestock, furniture, and sometimes the most unusual items. John usually attended auctions to buy supplies or occasionally a horse, but he never expected this particular auction would change his life. The sun had barely climbed over the hills when John arrived at the dusty town square. The smell of hay, fresh earth, and wood smoke filled the air. Vendors called out, advertising their goods. Farmers and townsfolk moved in clusters, some laughing, some haggling over prices. Children darted between legs, chasing chickens or rolling marbles on the cobblestones. John's boots crunched on the ground as he made his way toward the auction pen, where a long wooden platform had been set up for the day's items. As the auction began, John observed the usual fare: cows, horses, a few pieces of furniture, and bundles of tools. The auctioneer's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, urging the crowd to bid quickly. John paid attention but did not feel compelled to buy anything. He was content watching the bustle, letting the noise and excitement wash over him without participating. Then something unusual caught his eye. Toward the far end of the platform, hidden among old furniture and crates, stood a figure. It was a young woman, unusually tall, with a sack covering her head. Her hands were folded calmly in front of her, and her posture suggested a quiet dignity. John's brow furrowed. He had seen many odd things at auctions, but never a person being sold with a sack over her head. The auctioneer noticed John staring and smiled, sensing curiosity in the crowd. "Now here's something you don't see every day," he called. "A young lady standing here for your interest, sold as she is. No names, no details, just what you see. She is tall, strong, and ready for a new home. Who will start the bidding?" The crowd murmured. Some laughed nervously, others whispered to each other. A few bold townsfolk shouted guesses, trying to learn more about her. $2, called someone in the back. $5, shouted another, but no one moved closer to bid seriously. The idea of buying a human being was strange, even unsettling, though the auctioneer framed it as a curiosity and novelty, not cruelty. John felt a strange pull in his chest. He did not know why. He did not feel a need to impress the crowd or show off. Yet the mystery of the woman, the way she stood quietly, the anonymity of her presence, the calmness in her posture, captivated him. He made a sudden decision. $2, he said, stepping forward. The words felt natural, almost like a reflex. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose. $2, do I hear more? There was a pause, then silence. No one else bid. The auctioneer glanced at John. "Sold, sir, sold," he declared. John nodded politely and stepped back. The crowd murmured, some in disbelief, some in amusement. A few clucked their tongues, shaking their heads at the strange purchase. John felt neither excitement nor triumph as he approached the young woman. He could not see her face, only the outline beneath the sack. He spoke softly. "Come with me. I'll take care of you." His voice was calm, steady, without mockery or judgment. She nodded once, her movements precise and deliberate, as if she understood and trusted him without question. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. John led her on horseback, keeping a careful eye on the path and the surroundings. Occasionally, she glanced around but did not speak. Her presence was unusual. The stillness she carried was almost tangible, and John felt a mixture of curiosity, concern, and respect. As the ranch came into view, the sun was dipping toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. The animals stirred in the pens, cows lowing and horses neighing softly. John dismounted, stretching his legs, then turned to the young woman. "This will be your home now," he said simply. He gestured toward the modest house and the small barn. "You can stay wherever you like." She nodded again, slowly, and followed him. She moved gracefully, despite her height, almost as if she had always been accustomed to wide-open spaces and outdoor life. John noted her hands, long and strong, with careful movements that suggested skill and care. He wondered what her story might be, how she came to be here, and why she remained hidden beneath that sack. Over the next few days, John observed her quietly. She did not speak much, but she participated in chores around the ranch. She fed the animals with careful hands, swept the barn, and helped gather firewood. John respected her work ethic and her silence. He could sense intelligence behind her quiet demeanor. Every action she took was deliberate, thoughtful, and without complaint. The townspeople, meanwhile, continued to talk about the auction. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she was an heiress hiding from a fortune hunter. Others guessed she had fled from a controlling family or a dangerous situation. Children whispered stories about her in the schoolyard, and grown-ups speculated at the general store. John paid little attention to the gossip, focusing instead on the tasks at hand and observing the woman for himself. One evening, as the sun set in a sky painted with pink and orange streaks, John sat on his porch watching the woman tend the garden. She moved with a quiet confidence, bending to plant seeds, adjusting the soil, and checking the water. John felt a strange admiration for her. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, a mystery wrapped in silence and humility. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "I don't know who you are or why you were hiding, but I'll make sure you're safe here." She paused, looked up briefly, and nodded as if acknowledging the words. That single gesture, simple yet profound, left a mark on John. He realized then that he felt something unexpected, a sense of connection, even trust between them. Nights on the ranch were quiet, with only the sounds of animals and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. John would sit on the porch, thinking about the day, the auction, and the strange turn his life had taken. He could not shake the feeling that fate had brought her to him for a reason. She had been silent, hidden, and yet, somehow, she had entered his life in a way no one else ever had. By the end of the first week, he had begun giving her small tasks that required more interaction. She would follow his instructions without question, but still, he knew nothing of her past or her name. He wanted to ask, but something told him to wait. Patience, he reminded himself, would reveal the truth in time. The auction had seemed like a simple event, a few hours of business and community chatter. But it had brought a new element into John's life, something unexpected and profound. He did not know the full story yet, but he sensed that the days ahead would be unlike any he had lived before. And so, life at the ranch began in an unusual way. A quiet, solitary man and a mysterious, silent woman sharing the same space. It was an arrangement that promised challenges, surprises, and perhaps a bond neither could have predicted. John tended his animals, mended fences, and went about his daily work, but always with one thought lingering in the back of his mind. Who was she really, and what would happen when the mystery of her identity was finally revealed? Even as he pondered these questions, he felt a spark of something he could not yet name, a mixture of curiosity, respect, and perhaps the beginnings of a deep and unexpected connection. The auction had been the start, but the true story was just beginning, unfolding slowly on the quiet, sun-drenched fields of John's ranch. Days passed on John's ranch, each one blending into the next in a rhythm of work and quiet reflection. The mysterious woman remained mostly silent, yet her presence had begun to fill the space in subtle, unexpected ways. She moved through the ranch with a grace that reminded John of the wind brushing across the plains. Her hands were steady and skilled, tending the animals, mending fences, and preparing meals with care. Every small gesture showed thoughtfulness, a careful attention to detail that John found remarkable. John observed her constantly, curious about her habits and her quiet demeanor. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words were measured, soft, and deliberate. Even then, it was often just a nod, a gentle shake of her head, or a single word. Her silence was not awkward, it was peaceful. It allowed John to focus on the work around the ranch while slowly learning to understand her presence. The townspeople continued their gossip. Rumors about the auction and the mysterious bride spread quickly. Some said she was an heiress hiding from a controlling family. Others suggested she had fled a dangerous situation. Children whispered her story in hushed tones at school, imagining fantastical adventures or secret powers. Yet, John paid little attention to these tales. He did not care about speculation or idle chatter. What mattered to him was the woman standing quietly at his ranch, tending to her tasks with care and patience. One morning, as the sun rose in a gentle haze, John noticed her sitting near the small pond on the edge of the ranch. She had rolled up her sleeves and was carefully scrubbing a set of water buckets. The reflection of her tall figure shimmered on the water's surface, and John realized how unusual she looked, not just in size, but in the calm confidence she carried. It was a presence that seemed to belong to the earth itself, steady and grounding. "Morning," John said quietly, leaning against the doorway of the barn. She looked up, meeting his eyes briefly before returning to her work. The nod she offered was small but polite, acknowledging him without drawing attention to herself. John smiled faintly, appreciating the simple exchange. In her quiet, he felt a connection forming, a trust that did not need words to be understood. He decided that today he would assign her a task that required more cooperation. "We need to repair the fence along the north field," he said, pointing toward the line of wooden posts that had weathered many storms. "I'll start over there. You can help with the posts closer to the barn." She nodded once and began gathering the tools. John watched as she lifted the posts with ease, her height and strength making the work seem almost effortless. Even as she labored, there was a softness in her movements, a gentle care for the animals that wandered nearby, a careful handling of the wood so that it would not splinter or crack. John felt a quiet admiration. Here was a woman capable of great strength, yet she wielded it with precision and thoughtfulness. As they worked side by side, John tried to engage her in conversation. He asked simple questions about her past, her family, and the journey that had led her to the auction. She listened quietly, occasionally nodding or tilting her head, but never giving a full answer. It frustrated him at times, yet it also deepened his curiosity. He wanted to understand her world, to learn the story hidden beneath the sack that had once covered her head. Over the next few days, John began to notice subtle changes. The woman began to speak in short phrases, simple words that hinted at a developing trust. She would tell him when she needed water for the animals, ask permission before entering the house, or quietly warn him about a loose fence post. Each word was deliberate, chosen carefully, and John cherished these small moments of communication. They were signs that she was beginning to feel comfortable, that she was slowly opening a door he had only dreamed of entering. One afternoon, as the heat of the day settled over the ranch, John found her sitting beneath an old oak tree, sketching in a small notebook he had provided. Her drawings were simple, but they captured the ranch with remarkable detail: the angles of the barn, the curve of the hills, the patterns of the clouds above. John was fascinated. She had a keen eye, a way of seeing the world that was both artistic and precise. "Those are good," he said softly, peering over her shoulder. She looked up at him, startled, and then smiled faintly. It was the first real smile he had seen. It was small, hesitant, but genuine. The warmth of that expression stayed with him long after he returned to the barn to continue his chores. At night, the ranch was quiet except for the occasional rustle of animals settling in their pens. John would sit on the porch, listening to the wind, thinking about the day's work and the mysterious woman who had so suddenly become a part of his life. He realized that her silence was not a barrier, it was a bridge. It allowed him to observe, to learn, and to slowly appreciate the depth of her character. One evening, as a soft rain began to fall, he found her standing near the house, watching the droplets ripple in the puddles. She turned slightly when he approached, as if she had sensed his presence. "Do you like it here?" he asked, his voice gentle. She nodded once, then lowered her gaze. There was a quiet honesty in her answer that spoke louder than words could. John felt a warmth spread through him. It was a simple affirmation, yet it carried weight. She was choosing to stay, choosing to trust him and the ranch, even without knowing the full extent of what lay ahead. Over the next week, John tried to involve her more in the daily life of the ranch. He taught her how to milk the cows, how to check for sickness in the animals, and how to navigate the land during different weather conditions. She was a fast learner, her intelligence and focus apparent in every task she undertook. John admired her resilience and patience. She was learning quickly, yet she retained her calm, quiet presence, never rushing or forcing herself into his world. Their days followed a rhythm that was both familiar and new. Morning chores, tending the animals, preparing meals, and repairing fences, each task became a shared experience. They did not speak much, but their companionship grew stronger. John began to feel a bond forming, subtle and unspoken, but powerful in its quiet way. He found himself looking forward to her presence, to the small gestures and silent understanding that had become a part of his daily life. One afternoon, a stray dog wandered onto the ranch. The woman noticed it before John did. She approached slowly, speaking in soft, comforting tones, and the dog, hesitant at first, allowed her to come close. She fed it scraps from their meal and gently guided it away from the main herd of animals. John watched, impressed by her patience and her natural ability to care for creatures, whether human or animal. The days turned into weeks, and the bond between John and the mysterious woman deepened. He still did not know her full story, and she still did not speak of her past. Yet he began to feel a sense of companionship he had never known before. It was a quiet, patient love, not romantic yet, but rooted in respect, trust, and shared experience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, John decided to ask her a question he had been hesitant to pose. "What is your name?" he asked gently. She paused, her hands resting on the wooden fence. For a moment there was silence, and John felt a flutter of anticipation. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. Then very softly she whispered a single word, her name. John felt a shock of recognition, a deep sense of relief and joy. This simple act of sharing her name was more than words. It was trust, a willingness to be seen and known. He realized that this moment marked a turning point. The mystery that had captivated him was beginning to unravel, revealing a person of depth, courage, and quiet strength. From that day forward, life at the ranch continued, but with a new energy. The woman began to speak more often, using her name to introduce herself and share small details about her past. She was still cautious, but the walls she had built around herself began to crumble. John listened patiently, never pressing, allowing her to reveal her story at her own pace. Their days became filled with shared work, quiet conversation, and mutual respect. John discovered her humor, her insight, and her gentle way of seeing the world. She, in turn, began to understand him, his solitude, his love for the land, and the steady kindness that had drawn her to him. The auction that had seemed like a simple, almost absurd event had brought something extraordinary into both of their lives. It had been a beginning, a chance encounter that led to trust, companionship, and the slow unfolding of a connection neither had anticipated. John knew that the weeks ahead would bring challenges. There would be questions from the townspeople, moments of doubt, and the need for patience as the woman fully revealed her past. Yet he felt confident that together they could face anything. The foundation of respect and trust they were building was stronger than any obstacle the world could place in their path. And so, life at the ranch moved forward, each day a small step toward understanding, each task an opportunity to grow closer. The mysterious woman, once hidden beneath a sack, had begun to reveal herself, not just in name, but in spirit. John, the quiet rancher who had lived a life of solitude, found his days enriched by her presence, and his heart slowly opening to the possibility of something deeper, something lasting and profoundly human. As the days passed, John and the woman, now introduced to him by her name Mary, settled into a new rhythm. Life on the ranch had grown richer, more lively, and subtly more complicated. John had always been accustomed to solitude, to the quiet sound of the wind over the fields and the low murmur of animals. Yet Mary's presence brought a different energy, gentle, thoughtful, and quietly commanding. Even her silence now carried meaning. It spoke of observation, patience, and intelligence. John noticed the small ways she integrated herself into ranch life. She would rise early, often before he did, and check on the animals. The chickens would greet her with soft clucks, as if they recognized her careful hand. She would lead the cows to pasture, speaking softly in words John was slowly learning to understand. At first, she had only whispered or nodded, but now she could communicate in small sentences, a development that delighted John. "Mary," he said one morning, as they guided a young foal through the stable, "you have a natural way with the animals. They trust you more than anyone I've known." Mary glanced at him, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She shook her head modestly. I watched my father," she whispered, "and learned." Her voice was soft but confident. John realized she had lived a life full of quiet observation, learning skills and patience that were now becoming visible in her care of the ranch. Curiosity about her past had always lingered in John's mind. He understood that asking too many questions too soon might make her uncomfortable. Yet the bond between them was growing, built on mutual respect, shared work, and quiet understanding. One evening, after a long day of mending fences and tending the animals, he decided to ask gently. "Mary," he began, sitting beside her on the porch steps, I don't want to push you, but I want to know your story. Why were you at that auction? Why the sack? Mary paused, staring at the horizon where the sun dipped behind rolling hills, the colors of gold and orange reflected in her eyes. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I ran away, she said. My family, they wanted me to marry someone I did not love. They thought it was best for them for the family name. I did not want that life. I wanted freedom. I wanted to choose my own path. John listened silently, nodding. He understood the courage it must have taken to escape such pressure, to travel alone, and to place herself in the hands of strangers at the auction. The weight of her story added depth to the woman he was coming to know, transforming the mystery into something tangible, human, and profoundly brave. Mary continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. I hid my face because I was afraid. I could not show them, I could not be found. The auction, I thought it would be a place where no one knew me. I never expected anyone would care. Her eyes met John's, and for the first time there was no hesitation, no guardedness, just honesty. John reached out, gently resting his hand on hers. I do care, he said simply. I will make sure you are safe here. You can trust me. Mary's lips curved into a faint, relieved smile. She leaned back slightly, feeling the warmth of the late afternoon sun. I think I can, she admitted. Her trust was growing, and with it came a sense of comfort she had not felt in a long time. Over the next weeks, John learned more about Mary's past. She told him stories of her childhood, of living in a strict household where her choices had been limited, and of the long days spent learning practical skills while being expected to remain quiet and obedient. She shared the small joys she had discovered along the way, caring for animals, learning to cook, and finding beauty in simple things like the sound of rain on the roof or the pattern of stars in the night sky. Her stories fascinated John. They were not filled with grandeur or wealth, but with courage, resilience, and a quiet determination. She had survived hardship, made difficult choices, and now, in the freedom of the ranch, she was beginning to flourish. John admired her strength, and he realized that her past had shaped her into the remarkable person she was, patient, wise, and capable of great empathy. As they worked side by side, John noticed that Mary began to take initiative. She repaired fences without being asked, suggested improvements to the barn, and even began experimenting with planting new vegetables in the garden. Her creativity and practical knowledge complemented John's experience. Together, they were building a more efficient, thriving ranch. The partnership was unspoken but real, growing stronger with each shared task. One afternoon, a heavy storm approached. Dark clouds rolled across the sky and the wind picked up, rattling the trees. John and Mary worked quickly to secure the animals, bringing the cows into shelter and tying down loose equipment. Mary moved calmly, her actions confident and precise. John watched her, feeling a sense of admiration and gratitude. Even in the chaos of the storm, she remained steady, a grounding presence. As the rain began to fall in sheets, John found them both huddled under the small roof of the barn. Water dripped from the edges, soaking their boots and clothes, but neither complained. Mary smiled faintly at him, and he realized how natural it felt to share these moments with her. Even in discomfort, there was a sense of connection, of shared experience. After the storm passed, the sky cleared, and the air smelled fresh and clean. They walked together across the wet fields, tending to the animals that had become restless during the downpour. The golden light of the setting sun reflected on the wet grass, creating a serene and almost magical scene. John felt a quiet contentment, realizing that life on the ranch had become richer because of Mary's presence. At night, they would sit together on the porch, the sounds of the ranch settling into quiet rhythms. John listened as Mary spoke more about her dreams and hopes. She talked about wanting to see the world beyond her family's expectations, about learning new skills, and about finding a place where she could belong. Her words were filled with sincerity, a mix of hope and cautious optimism. John began to share more about his own life. He told her about his childhood, the ranch he had inherited, and the long days he spent learning to care for the land. He spoke of his solitude, his love for the animals, and the simple joys he found in everyday life. Mary listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed her curiosity and intelligence. Their conversations became longer, more meaningful, and filled with mutual respect. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between John and Mary deepened. They laughed together, shared stories, and supported each other in the work of the ranch. The initial mystery that had surrounded Mary's arrival began to fade, replaced by understanding, trust, and affection. John realized that the woman he had purchased for $2 at the auction was no longer a stranger. She was a companion, a partner, and slowly, someone he cared for deeply. Mary, too, began to feel a sense of belonging. The ranch was no longer just a place to hide. It had become a home. She appreciated John's patience, his kindness, and the way he treated her with respect and dignity. For the first time in her life, she felt safe to be herself, to speak her mind, and to take initiative. The freedom she had sought for so long was finally within reach, and she cherished it deeply. One morning, as they worked together in the garden, John noticed the change in Mary's confidence. She moved with purpose, organizing the tools, planning the planting rows, and directing him with a quiet authority. It was a remarkable transformation from the timid, silent woman he had first met at the auction. He smiled to himself, proud of her growth and the strength she had always possessed but had kept hidden. "Mary," he said gently, pausing to wipe the sweat from his brow, "you've done so much here. You've made this place better, stronger, and I'm grateful for everything you do." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both humility and pride. I am grateful too," she said softly. "You gave me a chance, a place where I could be myself." Her voice was steady now, confident, and free from the fear that had once defined her life. The story of Mary's past, revealed in fragments and whispers, had become a bridge between them. It had allowed John to understand her, to appreciate her courage, and to see the depth of her character. It had also allowed Mary to trust him, to open herself to the possibility of connection and partnership. Together, they were building a life based on mutual respect, understanding, and the quiet joy of shared work. As the sun set on another day, casting golden light across the ranch, John and Mary stood together, surveying the land they cared for. The animals settled into their pens, the fences stood strong, and the garden thrived. It was a simple life, yet it was rich with meaning, connection, and the promise of a future built together. John realized that the auction had been the beginning of something extraordinary. What had started as a curious purchase, a strange and unexpected event, had transformed into a profound partnership. Mary was no longer a mysterious stranger. She was an integral part of his life, a companion whose strength, intelligence, and quiet courage had reshaped his world. And Mary, for her part, felt the weight of her past lifting. She had found a place where she could grow, contribute, and belong. She had found someone who valued her not for appearances, but for her character, her skills, and her heart. The ranch had become more than a home. It had become a sanctuary, a place where trust and respect flourished. Together, they faced the future with confidence, knowing that the bond they had forged through work, conversation, and shared experience was unbreakable. The story of the auction, the sack, and the $2 purchase had become just the beginning of a life filled with hope, understanding, and the quiet magic of connection. As the weeks turned into months, life at the ranch had become a comforting routine for both John and Mary. Yet with routine came a deeper understanding of each other, a sense of companionship that neither had expected when they first met at the auction. The days were filled with work, laughter, and quiet conversation, and slowly John began to realize that his feelings for Mary had grown into something more than mere admiration or respect. Mary, too, felt a connection that went beyond simple gratitude or trust. She had come to the ranch seeking safety and freedom, but she had found something richer: companionship, understanding, and the quiet possibility of love. She appreciated John's patience, the way he never rushed her or demanded more than she could give, and the way he treated her with dignity and respect, even in the most ordinary moments. One morning, as the sun rose over the fields, John and Mary were tending to the animals together. The cows grazed peacefully, the chickens clucked softly, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh hay and earth. John watched Mary as she guided a stubborn calf toward the pen, her movements careful but firm. She laughed softly when the calf resisted, a sound that was gentle and full of life. John felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling he had not known in years. "You're good with them," he said, smiling. "They trust you completely." Mary looked at him, her eyes reflecting the morning light. "They can feel kindness," she replied simply. "They know when someone cares." John nodded, touched by her words. He realized that her insight extended beyond animals. She could read people as well, understanding their intentions and feelings with quiet intuition. This thought brought a sense of comfort. If Mary could understand the world so deeply, perhaps she could understand him too. As days passed, the small town around the ranch began to take notice of the changes. People whispered about Mary, about how she had become an integral part of the ranch, and about the growing bond between her and John. Some admired their partnership, seeing it as a model of cooperation and mutual respect. Others were curious or skeptical, questioning the unusual circumstances of their meeting and the unconventional beginning of their relationship. John paid little attention to the gossip. He had learned to live by his own standards, valuing integrity, honesty, and hard work over the opinions of others. Yet he could not ignore Mary's feelings. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, he asked gently, "Does it bother you what people think?" Mary shook her head. "I don't mind what they say," she replied. "I care more about what we build here together. This is our life, our home." John smiled, feeling a sense of pride and relief. Her words reflected the strength and independence he had come to admire so much. They were building a life based on trust, respect, and shared purpose, and no gossip could change that. Their bond deepened not only through work, but also through shared moments of quiet reflection. On warm afternoons, they would sit beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the ranch, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves and watching the animals move across the fields. These moments were simple, yet profound, allowing them to connect without the need for words. One day, John noticed Mary examining a patch of land near the river that had been overgrown with weeds. She knelt down, pulling them gently and inspecting the soil. John approached, curious. "What are you planning?" he asked. Mary looked up, her eyes shining with determination. "This land can grow more than just weeds," she said. "We can plant vegetables, flowers, even trees. It will take time, but it will be beautiful." John nodded, impressed by her vision. "I like it," he said. "Let's do it together." Over the following weeks, they worked side by side, turning the overgrown patch into a thriving garden. They planted rows of vegetables, tended young saplings, and created a small space that was both productive and beautiful. The work was hard, but it was also rewarding, and the shared effort strengthened their connection. As their partnership grew, so did their understanding of each other's hearts. John began to recognize the depth of Mary's courage, the bravery it had taken to escape her past, to trust him, and to embrace a life that was uncertain yet full of possibility. Mary, in turn, saw the kindness and strength in John, the quiet resilience that had allowed him to manage the ranch alone, to care for the land, and to open his heart to someone new. One afternoon, a traveling merchant arrived at the ranch, bringing news from the town. He mentioned the whispers about John and Mary, the speculation that their relationship was unusual, and the admiration some townsfolk had for their dedication. Mary listened quietly, then looked at John. "We don't need to explain ourselves," she said firmly. "We know the truth of our lives, that is enough." John felt a surge of pride and affection. Her words reflected the independence and clarity of mind that had first drawn him to her. "You're right," he said. "We have each other, and that's what matters." Despite the peaceful life they had created, challenges were inevitable. One evening, a group of townspeople arrived at the ranch, curious and a little judgmental. They asked questions about Mary's past, about the auction, and about her presence on the ranch. John stood beside her, calm but protective, while Mary spoke quietly yet confidently, answering their questions without defensiveness. Her composure impressed the visitors. They saw her intelligence, her poise, and the mutual respect between her and John. Slowly, the skepticism in their eyes was replaced with admiration. By the time they left, there was a sense of acceptance, not just of Mary's place on the ranch, but of the partnership she and John had built. As the months continued, John and Mary's relationship grew deeper. They shared more than chores and work. They shared laughter, dreams, and small joys. John taught Mary to ride horses more confidently, and she, in turn, introduced new ideas for the ranch, from planting gardens to improving the barns. Their cooperation became seamless, each understanding the other's strengths and respecting each other's limitations. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the small living room, Mary spoke softly. "I never imagined a life like this," she said. "I thought freedom meant being alone, but now I see it can mean having someone who understands you, who supports you, who cares." John reached out, taking her hand in his. "I understand," he said quietly. I've lived alone for so long, but now with you I feel complete. We are building something together, stronger than anything I could have imagined. Mary smiled, the warmth of her expression filling the room. She leaned closer, resting her head lightly on his shoulder. The gesture was small, yet it carried the weight of trust, affection, and an unspoken promise of partnership. John felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that their bond had grown beyond the practical, beyond companionship, into something that touched the heart and soul. Life at the ranch continued to flourish. The garden thrived under Mary's care, the animals were healthy and well-tended, and the land seemed to respond to the dedication and harmony between the two of them. Visitors from the town came occasionally, seeking advice or sharing news, and each time they observed the quiet strength of the partnership that had formed between John and Mary. The bond they had built was not based on necessity or obligation, but on choice, respect, and shared experience. John had chosen to care for Mary, not out of pity or duty, but out of recognition of her courage and character. Mary had chosen to trust John, not out of fear or convenience, but out of appreciation for his kindness and integrity. Together, they had created a life that was both practical and deeply meaningful. One morning, John and Mary walked through the fields, observing the progress of the garden and the health of the animals. The sun was rising, casting a golden light across the ranch, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. John looked at Mary, her hair catching the sunlight, her posture confident and graceful, and felt a surge of admiration. "You've changed this place," he said softly. "And not just the land, me too. I feel different, happier, complete." Mary turned to him, her eyes reflecting both the morning light and the depth of her emotions. "We've changed it together," she said. "Together we've built something that lasts." The days that followed were filled with quiet joy, mutual support, and deepening affection. Their bond had grown beyond the practicalities of ranch life, touching the heart in ways neither had anticipated. John realized that the unusual circumstances of their meeting, the auction, the sack, the $2 purchase, had been the start of a remarkable journey, one that had brought courage, trust, and love into both of their lives. As the sun set each evening, casting long shadows across the ranch, John and Mary would sit together, watching the animals settle and listening to the gentle sounds of the land. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but they also knew that together they could face anything. The partnership they had built, rooted in trust, respect, and affection, was unshakable. And in those quiet moments, when the world seemed to pause and the sky glowed with the soft colors of dusk, John and Mary understood that they had found something rare and precious, a bond that went beyond circumstance, beyond expectation, and beyond fear. It was a connection built on honesty, patience, and the shared journey of two people learning to trust, respect, and love one another. The ranch had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Seasons had passed since the day John had purchased Mary at the auction for $2. The land was thriving under their combined care, and the animals were healthy and content. Yet, for John and Mary, the most significant change was not in the land or the animals, but in the bond that had grown between them. It was a connection built on trust, patience, and shared experience, a bond that had matured into something deeper and undeniable. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the hills, John stood at the edge of the ranch, watching the golden light spill across the fields. The dew sparkled on the grass, and the air was filled with the fresh scent of earth and growing plants. Mary approached quietly, carrying a basket of eggs from the henhouse. She smiled, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. John felt a warmth in his chest, realizing that he had come to care for her more than he had ever cared for anyone. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady but soft. Mary returned the greeting, setting the basket down on the table. "Morning," she replied. "The chickens were generous today." She laughed lightly, and the sound was like a gentle melody, filling the quiet morning with joy. John watched her for a moment, then said, "Mary, there's something I want to talk about." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "These past months, living and working together, I've realized that I don't want life to continue without you by my side. I want us to be together always." Mary's eyes widened slightly, and she looked down at her hands. The soft morning light highlighted the gentle curves of her face. She had grown in confidence over the months, but moments like these, when John expressed his heart, still left her breathless. "John," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I feel the same." I never expected to feel this way, but I do. I trust you and I want to be with you. John stepped closer, taking her hands in his. Then let's not wait any longer. I want to marry you, Mary, here on this land we've nurtured together where our life has grown. Mary's eyes glistened with tears of joy. Yes, she said softly, I want that too. And so plans for a wedding began, simple but filled with meaning. John and Mary decided that it would not be a grand affair, not a spectacle for the town. Instead, it would be a celebration of their journey, their trust, and the life they had built together. They prepared the ranch, cleaning the barn, arranging flowers, and ensuring that every detail reflected the partnership they had forged. On the morning of the wedding, the air was clear and crisp. The sun shone brightly, casting a golden glow over the fields and trees. John dressed in his best attire, a simple, well-worn suit that reflected his humble nature. Mary wore a dress she had chosen herself, modest but elegant, flowing gently in the morning breeze. Her hair was braided with wildflowers she had picked from the fields. She looked radiant, her face glowing with happiness and peace. The townspeople were invited, but only those who had been supportive or genuinely curious about the couple's story. They arrived quietly, respectful of the occasion, and marveled at the transformation of the ranch. It had grown into a place of beauty and life, a symbol of the love and effort John and Mary had invested. The ceremony was simple. John stood before Mary, holding her hands and looking into her eyes. The officiant spoke softly, acknowledging the unusual circumstances of their meeting, but focusing on the genuine love and respect that had developed between them. John's voice was steady as he spoke his vows. Mary, he said, from the day I first saw you, I have admired your strength, your courage, and your kindness. You have brought joy, understanding, and love into my life. I promise to stand by you, to care for you, and to face life's challenges together. I will honor and respect you for all our days. Mary's eyes glistened as she responded. John, you have given me safety, trust, and a home. You have allowed me to be myself, to grow, and to love freely. I promise to stand by you, to care for you, and to share in all the joys and hardships of life. I will honor and respect you for all our days. When John asked her to say her name as the final step of their vows, she spoke it clearly and confidently. Mary, she said. In that moment, it was not just a name. It was a declaration of identity, trust, and acceptance. John smiled, knowing that the woman who had once hidden beneath a sack had fully embraced her new life, and he had fully embraced her as his partner. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and the guests cheered softly, some wiping away tears of joy. John and Mary kissed gently, a tender, meaningful gesture that symbolized the culmination of months of patience, trust, and growing love. After the ceremony, the celebration continued on the ranch. Tables were set with simple but delicious food, including vegetables from their own garden, eggs from the chickens, and freshly baked bread. Laughter filled the air as friends and supportive neighbors shared stories and offered congratulations. Children played nearby, chasing each other across the fields, while the adults marveled at the transformation of the couple and the ranch. John and Mary worked side by side, serving guests, ensuring everyone felt welcome and sharing smiles with each person who approached. It was a day of joy, not because of grandeur or extravagance, but because it was a testament to their journey, their courage, and the life they had built together. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow across the fields, John and Mary stepped aside to watch the sky. The world seemed quiet, the animals settled, and the wind carried a gentle hush over the ranch. John took Mary's hand, feeling the warmth and strength in her grip. Look at what we've built, he said softly. Not just the ranch, but this life together. Mary smiled, leaning her head lightly on his shoulder. I never imagined it would be like this, she replied. I thought freedom meant being alone, but now I see it means sharing life with someone who understands you, who respects you, and who loves you. John squeezed her hand gently. And I never imagined I would find someone like you. You've changed everything, Mary. My life, my heart, everything. In the weeks that followed, life returned to its usual rhythm, but with a new layer of warmth and fulfillment. John and Mary continued to care for the land, the animals, and each other, but now with the certainty that they were partners in every sense. Their home was filled with laughter, conversation, and the quiet joys of shared work and companionship. Visitors to the ranch often remarked on the harmony between John and Mary. Their story, once the subject of whispers and speculation, had become one of admiration. People were inspired by their patience, their respect for each other, and the way they had built a life together from unusual circumstances. Yet John and Mary remained humble, understanding that the true value of their life was not in public recognition, but in the trust, love, and shared purpose they had cultivated. Mary continued to grow in confidence and skill. She experimented with new crops, learned to tend to the more challenging animals, and even began teaching John a few new techniques she had picked up over the years. John, in turn, continued to support her, valuing her insights, her intelligence, and her thoughtful perspective on every decision they made together. Evenings were spent on the porch, watching the sun dip below the hills, listening to the animals settle, and sharing quiet conversation. They spoke of dreams for the future, plans to expand the garden, perhaps even adding new animals to the ranch. They shared stories of their pasts, laughing at minor misadventures and marveling at the journeys that had led them to this moment. One night, under a sky full of stars, Mary spoke softly. "I am glad I came here, John. I am glad I trusted you even when I was scared. This life, it is more than I ever imagined." John looked at her, the silver light of the moon highlighting her face. "And I am glad you came," he replied. "You've brought life, hope, and love into this place and into my heart." The seasons continued to change, each one marking a new chapter in their shared life. Spring brought fresh growth to the fields, summer filled the air with the warmth of long days, autumn painted the hills with gold and red, and winter wrapped the ranch in a quiet, peaceful blanket of snow. Through it all, John and Mary faced challenges, celebrated triumphs, and cherished the ordinary, everyday moments that made life meaningful. Their story became one of legend in the town, not because it was extravagant or dramatic, but because it was real. It was a story of courage, trust, patience, and the transformative power of love. A $2 auction purchase had turned into a lifelong partnership, proving that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings can lead to the most extraordinary lives. In the end, John and Mary thrived together, not just as husband and wife, but as true partners, companions, and friends. The ranch flourished under their care, but more importantly, their hearts flourished under their love. They had built a life that was safe, fulfilling, and deeply meaningful, and they faced the future together, with hope, joy, and unwavering trust in each other. And as they stood together on the porch, watching the sun rise over the hills once again, they knew, without doubt, that the journey that began with a simple auction, a sack, and a $2 bid had led them to a life richer than they could have ever imagined.